Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Wheelchair Activist. This is a podcast hosted by me, Emma Vogelmann, where I introduce you to some pretty amazing disabled people. Today's guest has been the most highly requested guest for this podcast, and I'm so excited to interview her. Today's guest is Nina Tame. Nina is an incredible social media personality, content creator, and disability mentor. I can't wait to get into today's conversation.
I often wonder how different my life would have been if I did have disabled peers and a disabled mentor and somebody to say to me, your body's not gross and you're not wrong, this isn't your fault. And I just couldn't believe it. It was so fun. And I remember it's this horrible, clunky, chair, but I was like, this is brilliant, I can move around. And I remember going to the toilet on my own and I just suddenly felt freedom. So I just wish parents would that matter of fact about it, because what do you think crutches are for? What do you think a walking stick's for? What is a hearing aid for? It doesn't need to be an embarrassing conversation. When I'm on Instagram and I'm just looking at the vast array of disabled bodies and just how beautiful they are in all their uniqueness, and it makes me so sad how medicalized we are.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Nina, for joining us on The Wheelchair Activist. I have to say, I've been so excited to have this chat with you. And in a previous episode that we've done with Chloe Timms, she kept saying how much she is a huge fan of yours when I asked her about her role models. And I was dying to say, oh, she's going to be on the podcast. But I thought, no, I'm just going to hold on just in case things change. But yeah, I'm so excited to have you on. So if you wouldn't mind telling our wonderful listeners a little bit about you, what you do, and why disabled people love you so much.
You're so sweet. Thank you very much. That was a lovely intro. So I'm Nina. I'm a mum of 4 kids. I'm a full-time wheelchair user. I'm a disability mentor, advocate, writer, content creator. I think that's it. And I've been using sort of Instagram mainly as my platform for about the last 3 or 4. Well, I've had Instagram for forever, but I've been using it to sort of talk about disability stuff and make content around disability for about the last 3 or 4 years. And I've no idea your question, how I've got this platform, really. It still surprises me every day. Okay, that's weird, but good.
I mean, I have to say, as someone who looks at a lot of your content, for me, what I think is so unique about you is how honest you are about disability, which I think, it's definitely one thing I really want to talk to you about. But it was a very close friend of mine who, when I was sort of speaking with her about how life with a disability can sometimes it can be really hard. And, so much of the time people will maybe unconsciously paint this idea of toxic positivity around disability, and oh, isn't it wonderful? And a lot of the times, yeah, it can be. There are a lot of really great things about being disabled, but it doesn't change that some days are really difficult. And I think your content is so honest about that, and it's really refreshing. So I wanted to ask you a really big question that I ask all of my guests, but what does disability mean to you?
I always kind of see disability as in two separate things. I see the kind of disability viewed through kind of a non-disabled lens, which is, very tragic and pitying and all of those kind of things. And then, and it's also all the kind of barriers that we face. But then, on the flip side of that, when I look at sort of disabled as my identity, then it sort of means community to me, because without kind of other disabled people, without finding other disabled people, I'm just not sure how I would have got through the last sort of 2-3 years. And there is just so much care from people who are all absolutely fucking knackered, but yet they're still all caring and there for each other and sending, what other people
Yeah.
need and checking in. And it's just this, like, it's so beautiful. And I just feel so kind of proud to sort of be a part of that.
I couldn't agree more about the community and how it can be a really supportive place, particularly when you know that everyone has their own things going on that they're dealing with. It almost makes it mean more, if that makes sense. That in a day that's
Mm-hmm.
already really challenging or, full of chronic pain or, whatever it is, that people are still like reaching out and checking if you're okay.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I think that that's really interesting that you view it through those two different lenses. And I know a lot of your content that you do tries to sort of challenge the non-disabled perception of disability. So sort of, yeah, where does that inspiration come from? Are there particular experiences that you've had that made you think, oh, I really want to address this?
I think because so I was born disabled. I was born with spina bifida, and throughout my kind of when I was at secondary school, I was sort of in and out of a wheelchair, on and off on crutches and things like that. And I hated it. I didn't have a particularly good group of friends. They were pretty mean, and just that kind of thing of anything that makes you different just makes you a target. So I think as I sort of entered into my 20s, although I probably still should have been using mobility devices, I did not. I just like pretended nothing was wrong. I would
Mm,
literally not dress sort of ulcers that I had on my feet. I would come out of hospital, literally go out the same night. Like I was just an absolute menace. And this kind of like, I think my own internalized ableism was so strong. And I just sort of I knew how disabled people were viewed because, I
mm,
kind of had those automatic thoughts, even though I was disabled. So when I was like sort of late 30s before I discovered things like the disabled community, which was obviously huge, discovering things like the social model, which really, not everybody clicks with it, but it really kind of sort of changed things in my head. And, and discovering
mm.
what ableism was, like, I didn't know, I hadn't heard of it. And suddenly just like, it was like, oh, wow. I've got quite a lot of stuff to unpick, stuff that I had internalized, just behaviors I'd accepted, the way I would respond to people when they asked me like intrusive questions, for example. I would tell them, I would be like, oh, yeah, I've got spina bifida and blah, 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 blah. And so just like realizing all of this stuff. And it just was this like, okay, I want to try and, do my bit along with all the other amazing people to kind of, put my story out there and dispel these myths and to challenge people's ideas, while I'm kind of still challenging my own ideas, and I'm doing all this for myself. And I think a huge, huge turning point was one of my sons has got spina bifida like me. And I always say this about him whenever I'm on anything like this, but spina bifida looks beautiful on him. And that changed everything for me as well, because that examined the way I was looking at my body, the way I was talking about my body, because I thought there is no way he's ever going to hear me say anything negative and then internalize that and apply that to himself.
Yeah.
So he was like, and still is, probably one of my biggest inspirations to want to just make, even the tiniest change. If I can do that for him going forward, so he has to deal with less shit when he gets older, then I'd be very, very happy.
I love that. And I think it's similar, but obviously quite different. But I find that when I talk to my disabled friends, about things like body image or around their hang-ups around disability, so like a little bit of their internalized ableism, I could speak till I'm blue in the face, but no, you're beautiful, you're wonderful, and genuinely
Mm,
mean it. But then if I tried to flip the script on me, I completely don't see it. I completely don't believe it. So I think that that's so interesting how you had that experience with your son and how it made you change or start to change how you view that disability. on
Mm.
you. And I really wanted to ask you this because I've struggled to do this, but how do you explain what internalized ableism is? Because I've tried to sort of explain it to non-disabled people, and I don't think I do a very good job of it.
I think it's, I mean, if we're just looking at ableism as being this kind of, its very basis is thinking as, thinking of disabled people as less than, then internalized ableism for me is applying that to myself. So it was thinking that I was sort of less worthy because I was disabled. It's what used to, have me apologizing on the street because somebody had to slightly, move out my way. And I'm sorry, apologize for taking up space. It was, all of that, those kind of
Mm,
internal messages. It was what sort of told me that, oh, I've got a big lump on my back. And it's what told me for years that, well, that's gross, because I was not born thinking the lump on
yeah,
my back was gross at all. I was very neutral about it, as much as I was about my elbows. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's certain parts of, well, as a kid, I think a lot of us remember the first time when we were told a part of our body was not right,
yeah.
whether it's somebody saying we're fat or somebody going, ugh, what's that? And, and I remember I think I could have only been about 4 years old, and I was with a group of other kids who were getting changed for fancy dress. And one of them pointed to my back and said, what's that? And I just remember just accepting that as fact. Oh, so that's not a nice thing then. So we won't ever show that again. Just like that. And I don't remember it being particularly distressing, but I just remember,
Mm,
I know that's the moment that I was like, oh, okay, well, my back's not nice. And just sort of being able to kind of unpick all of that and think, okay, well, we are told that this is what an attractive body should look like. And I think when I started, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent. Stop me if
no,
it's
please do. I'm
whatever.
loving this.
I noticed that when, obviously, I had the kind of privilege for quite a few years of being, non-disabled passing. And you wouldn't have known I was disabled unless, we were naked. So, I'd gone through the world like that. And when I started using mobility aids, but especially when I started using a wheelchair, I became completely invisible.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
I could have been like, I don't know, I don't know any relevant supermodels. I was going to say Kate Moss because I'm old and that's from my generation. But, literally could be rolling down the street just wearing nipple tassels, and most people still only see the wheelchair. And at first I
Mm,
was a bit kind of affronted by it and like, oh, okay. But then actually I realized how freeing that was, because actually I can be whatever size I want. I can wear whatever I want. I can do whatever I want. You're still only ever going to see the wheelchair. So it doesn't fucking matter. I will decide whether I think I'm attractive or not. And I say I am. So there we go.
yeah.
So I went off. We started with internalized ableism and I went back to body image again. But obviously it's all tied in, isn't it?
Mm,
We are told through, even as kids, subliminally, through the films that we watch, when we look at Disney villains or, people, it's always disabled people, whether it's Captain Hook, he's got a limb difference or whatever else. It's still there, this kind of messaging that is scary and that isn't attractive and that's not what we deem beautiful. And that's so sad, because when I'm on Instagram and I'm, just looking at the vast array of disabled bodies and just how beautiful they are in all their uniqueness. And it makes me so sad how medicalized we are and how medicalized those differences become. And then they're only ever seen in this kind of cold medical prodding kind of
mm.
light, as opposed to being seen as just, another beautiful part, of the uniqueness of our bodies.
I mean, there are so many parts that I particularly really resonate with, and that I think, as society, particularly as women, we're all held to these ridiculous beauty
Mm-hmm.
standards. But I think, for disabled people who, there's things about our bodies that no matter what diet we go on, no matter how much we exercise, we can't change that. And I I really struggle with that and sort of that like resentment towards the way that I look. And I think, there's there's a lot for people, I think, to learn from you, sort of that idea of the wheelchair actually being quite freeing, as opposed, because I am going off of a post that you put on Instagram just in the past couple of days about the phrase wheelchair
Mm.
bound, and sort of the picture that you put up was you sitting in your wheelchair and then like cord tied around you, and sort of like, no, that's what wheelchair bound is. You are a wheelchair user, and I think, wheelchair usage like has such a like stigma from non-disabled people as confining. So you're confined to a wheelchair, you're wheelchair bound. But I think that's so interesting that you've had the opposite view, really.
I think because sort of, I've had a long time. My mobility, as I say, was kind of up and down throughout my teenage years. Then it was pretty steady. And then once I kind of hit 30, it's been a real kind of gradual, almost a decade decline. So I think I had time to kind of get used to the idea. I didn't just obviously, it wasn't a sudden thing. And also, I think because my walking was such a struggle when I was trying to get around on crutches, and I hated it, and I just didn't go anywhere because it just made me so anxious. And so the first time I think we hired one, I think we went to a concert or something. So the first time, since being a teenager, as an adult with the autonomy, it was my choice. I wasn't, it was like, I'm going to choose to get one for this day out. And I
Mm.
just couldn't believe it. Like, it was so fun. And I remember it's this like horrible, clunky, like chair, but I was like, this is brilliant, I can move around. And I remember going to the toilet on my own, and just sort of, I just suddenly just felt freedom, because I know, had I been on my crutches, especially like if I had to go anywhere like a shopping center or anywhere that had that like shiny floor on crutches, I'd just be like, oh God, I'm going to stack it. So being
Mm.
in the chair where the shiny floor is like, the dream, it was just, that's what I felt. I didn't feel like, oh God, I'm confined to this chair now. It just felt like, oh wow, I can get out. I can have a day out with my kids without worrying. And, but I'd internalized all that for years, that, wheelchairs were terrible. Wheelchairs were the end of the line, the last resort. Like, you know, even I've had doctors say to me, I saw a neurosurgeon, I don't know, maybe 6-7 years ago. And as I, basically, it's nothing we can do for you. And his words were, you're lucky you can walk at all. Or, I'm surprised you can walk at all. At least you can walk. And I think if you're somebody with spina bifida and you have got mobility, that's kind of what you're, it's kind of that fear of, because other people with
Mm.
spina bifida are in a wheelchair. It's almost like this horror story that, well, that could be you, or at least that's not you. And
Yeah.
that's fucking gross. And again, it was just something I internalized as fact. I would literally tell myself that, well, I've got nothing to moan about because at least I'm not in a wheelchair. That's so
Yeah.
bad. But, that's just what we're all told, isn't it? So, of course, we're going to, nobody's like, oh, yeah, wheelchairs are really cool, in the same way we talk about
Mm.
bikes or whatever else. But yet, when you kind of, I was at my friend's the other day, and she's got a little girl the same age as my son. So she's like 8. She was just having a little go in my chair. And she just said to her mum, can I have one for Christmas, please? And her mum was like, no, no, you can't.
Oh.
But, to a kid, anything with wheels is fucking cool. And a
Yeah.
wheelchair is cool. But then when you sort of have parents, the first time a kid, comes across a wheelchair, instead of a parent just being like, oh yeah, that's a wheelchair, helps someone get around, they're either like
Mm.
literally yanking them to get out of my way, and and suddenly that kid's like, oh, okay, well then that's a weird, that's it, nobody's
Yeah. It like turns it into a taboo, like don't look, don't talk about
where it
it.
doesn't need, I just wish parents would, that matter of fact about it. Because what do you think crutches are for? What do you think a walking stick's for? What is a hearing aid for? Like, it doesn't need to be an embarrassing conversation. And it
Mm.
just, I talk a lot about disability being a neutral thing, because I think, like you said at the beginning, with the toxic positivity, I think it's either, you're inspiring, or, oh my God, you should just be dead. Like, there's no in between.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like, well, no, disability is just neutral. Sometimes it's crap, sometimes it's good, sometimes my life's crap and it has nothing to do with my disability. Just like anybody's life.
Yeah. I think, again, there's so much there. I mean, your story about the neurosurgeon who, at least you can still walk. That really resonates with me. I use a ventilator through a tracheostomy, and that was a result of getting the swine flu back in 2009. And when I moved to the UK, because I grew up in the States, but when I moved to the UK, the respiratory doctors that I was under and still am, they were sort of hell bent on getting me off of the ventilator and sort of, it was this pathway that I guess they have all their patients go on that, if you need a, tracheostomy and a ventilator because of an accident or an illness, like eventually you get off of it. And I sort of thought about it for a while and thought, well, actually, for me, it gives me a lot of freedom, which similar to you with the wheelchair, but for me, it means that I don't struggle breathing. I don't get tired. And at that time, I was at university. And if it means that I can sit through a whole lecture without needing to step out to cough or to catch my breath or something like that, then really that's improving my quality of life. But it was their perception of what, a ventilator was, that, oh, you need to come
Mm,
off of it. It's not something for the long term. And, for me, it really benefits me and
mm,
really improves my quality of life, as I said. But I remember, and like it's just sort of occurring to me now that I think that was probably one of my first experiences of being gaslit because the doctors then said that I was psychologically dependent on the ventilator. And just when you were saying about what your surgeon said, it sort of rang all of these alarm bells for me. It made me think of that and sort of, they're not seeing that these, whether it's a mobility aid or a breathing aid, that it can actually be quite a good thing and,
mm,
make us feel like we're living the life that we want
mm.
to.
It's, yeah, I mean, I don't think, I think I've faced probably the most ableism from doctors and medical professionals. And I don't think I know a
Mm,
single disabled person who hasn't experienced some sort of medical trauma. Um, and I think
yeah.
because we are people that can't be fixed or won't get better, what are they supposed to do with that? Because how are doctors supposed to get their kind of, payoff to their God complex if,
Yeah.
they can't? And then, so I think so often, especially, I mean, I say I've got a relatively well-known condition. I still think there's only like one or two specialists in the UK, but that's still better than some of my friends who've got chronic illnesses. And fucking hell, like the way they are spoke to, the way they are told it's
Mm,
all in their head. And it's just, it's really, really grim. I know obviously there's exceptions to the rules, and and I'm friends with and chat to people who are lovely doctors and nurses and everything else, but
mm.
on the most part it's pretty grim.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I just wanted to go back to what you said about like the two ways that non-disabled people can view disabled people, that inspiration or an absolute tragedy. Like sort of what we spoke a little bit about toxic positivity, but sort of how do you as an advocate and as a content creator go about trying to live in that middle space and make it real, I don't want to say relatable, but understandable to non-disabled people? How do you teach them about disability neutrality?
I think it's hard because I think the pity is so sort of strong sometimes that it is hard to sometimes go, actually being disabled is pretty shit, because it's almost like they're
Mm,
waiting to go, well, I told you so,
yeah.
and so I don't think there's always space for that kind of honesty. And I guess for me it's just to keep talking about it. That's, sometimes I feel
Mm,
like I'm repeating myself over and over again, or other times I just think I can't believe I'm having not having, but, making a video about how to interact with me. Like, why should I, like, this shouldn't even be a thing.
Yeah.
Like, I have to go, hey, this is how to treat a wheelchair user. Like, fucking, like, oh, so I'm really swearing and getting all
No, it's
cross.
fine.
But yeah, I guess, like, it's just trying to break things down in really simple terms. I use glasses a lot as a comparison. Like, my glasses that I use to help me read aren't particularly, it's the same principle as a wheelchair that I use to help me get around. And just to try and get people to understand that, we're not a different species, and also that disability is such a broad, it's huge. I can't possibly do it justice because I can only really speak about, obviously having a physical disability and being a wheelchair user. And, even that, trying to say to people, hey, I know you're all following me and I'm in a wheelchair, but actually, like, I make up a teeny percentage of what disability is. And I think, I don't know really, some days I just think, because I feel like my work is 50% kind of educating non-disabled people and 50% sort of supporting disabled people.
Yeah.
And that's probably my more favorite side of it, because some days I just think, what's the point in trying to convince non-disabled people that we're worthy and everything else? Because if people can't, even be bothered to do the tiny little things that were asked of them to keep disabled and vulnerable and sick people safe during the pandemic, then,
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And I think, when I found your content, it really made me feel seen. Like it really made me feel recognized because I, and I still struggle with this, but when I talk about disability sometimes, like I feel, am I a bad disabled person for not sort of, saying everything's wonderful, everything's great, and not recognizing that sometimes it is really hard and it is hard to deal with emotionally sometimes. I think we can be, like you were saying earlier, we can be very factual about it. Like I sometimes, and I think I've said this in a previous episode of the podcast where when I was commuting into work, that I could be discriminated against 3, 4 times just before I even got into the office. And there's, the difficulties with that, but I don't think often enough we talk about how does that feel, and how does it feel to deal with that day in and day out. And what I really respect about your content is that you do say, yeah, sometimes it is really hard. That doesn't mean that my life isn't worth living, but it's making it real and normal. And yeah, I'm interested in how, what's the feedback that you've gotten from non-disabled people? Have they sort of understood it, or yeah, sort of what's that reception been like?
In general, like, I'm really lucky because I don't get too much crap. I did stumble upon a forum the other day where I was slated, which wasn't nice, but we shan't go back on there.
Aww.
Won't go back on there again. But yeah, in general, like my Instagram, it's a lovely community. And what's nice is I'll get messages sometimes like, I don't know, for example, I watched this thing on TV and I instantly recognized that was inspiration porn. And I never would have tweaked that before. I would have just been like, oh, this is lovely. So that's sort of really nice. I love those sort of messages where people are like, you've really made me think, or I've called out the inaccessibility in this venue or whatever else. Sometimes I will get things like, well, I think what that person meant when they said that to you, though, was, and I'm just like, fuck off, like impact over intent always. I literally don't care.
Yeah.
I generally do not think that, anybody who's come up and asked me an intrusive question is like an evil puppy killer. Like I realize they're probably, a decent person, but I can still take umbrage because if it was a one-off incident, I probably wouldn't, but it's like being bitten by gnats over and over and over again every single day of your life. And, after a while, those tiny little things build up to feel like a really big thing. And I think as well, it's getting understanding that not always, like there's a lot of sides, there's sides to my disability that nothing's ever going to change. But also for me, most of the crap that I face with my disability is preventable, is the barriers, is the person coming over and pitying me. Like, you're pitying me purely because I can't walk, but actually you're my problem at the minute. You're what's making my life annoying at the minute because I'm fine. Say I'm in some accessible shopping centre having a lovely time. You coming over to me and, being like, oh, bless. That's what's wrong with my life. Because that's not normal. That's not how people talk to each other. And I think getting people
Yeah.
to sort of understand that what you think is terrible about disability isn't. It's fine. It's just a thing. Mobility aids can help with it. But actually, what is terrible about disability for me, more times than not, is non-disabled people and, access barriers and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. I feel like I'm having a real like light bulb moment where I'm like, oh my God, that's it. That is exactly how it is a lot of the time. It's that yeah, when you think about, I'm sorry, I'm just rambling, but I'm like, oh my God, I finally understand disability, which sounds ridiculous, but that makes so much sense, and what you said about impact over intent, I really get that as well. Someone may think that they're being kind by coming up to you and saying like, "Oh, bless her." I'm sure every disabled person's had this, but someone going like, "You're in my prayers, or I'll pray for you," and
Yeah.
it's just so uncomfortable. And you know, it's like you said, it's not normal. And yeah, their intent is kind, but is that because that pity, no one wants that when they're anywhere, let alone, out and about from an actual stranger.
Mm. And I think historically, because disabled people have just been either sort of institutionalized or, kept at home in a room, and just generally really, really vilified, there's almost this sort of, oh, but I'm being nice to you. I'm talking to you. Like,
Yeah,
surely you should be grateful for that. And it's like, but no, because it's still really othering. It's still separating us into like this different species that, okay, well, we used to not talk to you, but now we're super sweet to you and at least say hello. So that's okay. And it's like, no, I don't give a shit about any of that. Just give me the same rights that you've got. That's what I want.
yeah, couldn't agree more with that. So we talked a little bit about your teenage years and how in those years you were non-disabled presenting, but I want to know, who were your role models when you were growing up?
I don't know why I just made that noise. I don't know. I've been asked that before. I don't know. I don't think there was anybody that, I don't remember seeing any disabled people in the media. The first time I remember, I think I was 18, so that would have been 1998. And there was a magazine called, I think it was called Bizarre Magazine, that always had people like with 1,000 tattoos or people who turned themselves into a cat or something like that. But I remember there was a model on the front and she was an amputee and she was so cool. I can't remember her name now because it's just going way back, but she just had like this short black fringe. She was a bit like Betty Page and just, and had this sort of prosthetic leg and she just looked really cool. And that was sort of, I remember that being a bit of a thing like, oh, wow, you've got a visible difference and you look amazing and you're celebrated for it, and I've never seen that before. But I
Mm,
just I didn't sort of seek any disability representation really when I was growing up, because I think I just spent so much time trying to pretend I wasn't disabled.
yeah, I completely get that. And, it's when I ask people that, I completely anticipate the answer being it wasn't a disabled person.
Mm.
And I think that that's really valid. And I think that that's what a big thing that I think disabled people are trying to challenge now by, doing blogs or doing podcasts like this, where we're trying to provide that representation of a disabled person, but in a way, in a narrative that we choose.
exactly, like own voices,
Mm,
representation. And I often wonder like how different my life would have been if I did have disabled peers and and a
yeah,
disabled mentor and somebody to say to me, your body's not gross and you're not wrong and this isn't this isn't your fault. Just how sort of impactful that would be. And that kind of spurs a lot of the work, excuse me, like my mentoring work that I do, to be able to just sort of, to talk to and help somebody with something that I've been through. And yeah, it's just like one of my favorite things to do.
I really love that. And I feel like I would be doing myself an injustice if I didn't ask you about your role models now because I have been green with envy of your content recently where you met the wonderful Jonathan Van Ness. And
Did.
I, I want to know sort of what is it about JVN that you love so much and sort of, is that a representative of your role models now?
Yes. I mean, I've got lots of disability role models as well. Like, I think when some of the sort of first people that I discovered on the app was like Rebecca Sitting Pretty, who was writing these words that felt, just sort of spoke to me. And obviously they weren't just for me, but it felt like they were just for me. And that was,
Yeah.
that was sort of, yeah, that just blew my mind completely to sort of, it just, yeah, I really like Rebecca. With JVN, so when I basically, my mobility really, really started to decline, and I just had my youngest as well. So around the time that Queer Eye came out, I was sort of laid up in bed. I couldn't really walk. I had a newborn baby.
Mm.
And then, I don't know, I always refer to it as like I'm printed on them, a bit like Jacob in Twilight. They just kind of came on the screen, and I just loved that, they don't, I think, I worry far too much about what other people think of me. Well, certainly used to, a lot more than I do now. And to see somebody that just so comfortable in their own skin and to be able to just be themselves and not give a shit about other people's judgment, I think that's what kind of did it for me. And I just, yeah, I love them and I got to meet them and it was amazing. And they're so
Oh,
nice.
I was so jealous, but I was so like, oh my God, what an amazing moment that would have been. And I completely agree with you about that, just sort of owning confidence. And I think it's really difficult, particularly when we live in a world where, like you said, we're told we're gross, we're wrong, we're this, that, and the other. So no, I really love that. Um, so what is something that you're most proud
A
of?
nice question. I had somebody sent me a message the other day to say that they had a 10-year-old daughter who had cerebral palsy who watches my videos and that it's like made her more confident with her own wheelchair.
Oh, wow.
And that was it. I was just like, this is the best message that I have ever received. And I was talking to my lovely friend Mary, Invalid Art, the other day, and we were talking about, because we're both sort of the same age, and saying how, being able to use your own trauma to kind of prevent or to help prevent other people having to go through that same trauma,
Mm.
is a really lovely thing. And I think that's probably what I'm most proud of, that I just kind of had that vulnerability to go, you know what, fuck it, this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to put myself out there online and hope that that helps, even one other person, then I'll be, it'll be worth it. So yeah, that's what I'm most proud of.
How do you get to that level of comfort with vulnerability? And I'm aware that that's like a really big, difficult question, but for me, I, I literally have created this platform called the Wheelchair Activist. You would think, that I am super confident and all of that around talking about disability, but there are still so many parts of disability and how it impacts me that I'm still too afraid to talk about. But I completely agree with you that the people who are brave enough to share those difficult parts of their life and who they are will benefit other people. So how did you get to that point of being like, yeah, I'm just going to do it?
I think like, so for me, so I've got, for example, I've got amputated toes, and my feet are quite misshapen, and it's never something that I've never got, like I don't get them out in front of people, and I'm still not massively like, around my like Jason, the kids, whatever, but I still would feel a bit weird, say, in public. But anyway, I remember when I was like, I'm going to post about this on the internet, and I just remember being so scared, and I spoke to Jace about it, and we sort of spoke it through, and Jace, just spoke about what if people say horrible shit about that, but then also what if people are overly nice, because they're really not, let's be neutral about it.
Yeah.
But I just kind of thought, okay, I'm not going to die if I do this. So I just sort of did it, and I didn't die. And I think it's just been, every time I've done it, it's given me the encouragement to do it a bit more. And I don't share everything. Like I did a whole, I was really proud of it as well. I did this whole highlight around incontinence a couple of years ago. No, I don't know. I don't know what time is anymore. I had blue hair, so I think it was 2020, maybe. But I was so proud of this highlight. But even that, like my friend was like, are you going to talk about shit and poo? Not yet, no, not quite got there yet to talk about that on Instagram. So there's still parts of my experience that that I'm not ready to talk, or certainly not on Instagram anyway. But I think it just was, and it sounds like really crappy advice, but it was kind of just little bits, like was a little bit vulnerable. That was okay. There's been some posts that have definitely the next day that I felt like that real kind of vulnerability hangover, where I'm like, oh my God, what have I done? Why would I do that? That's, but then I'll get a message saying something, how that's, it resonated for somebody, or it really helped them. And then I'm like, okay, well, then that's cool. Not saying anybody has to do anything, nobody has to put themselves in that sort of position at all. But it just kind of, I think it just got less scary the more I've done it. And, you asked me that question like a week ago when I was in the height of my PMT, I'd have told you that I hate doing it and I don't know what I'm doing. And so for all my kind of confidence online, I still have times at home where I'm like, oh God, I'm awful, and I'm not doing this, and I'm not talking about this, and I'm a terrible advocate. And also what's been really helpful to me is kind of remembering that, like I'm loved by kind of my, my inner circle loves me, all of me, when I'm being an absolute knobhead and when I'm being lovely, they love all the sides of me. And even, I could literally throw my phone out the window and I would still have my little circle. And that kind of keeps me quite anchored as well in regards to, okay, so it doesn't really matter, what happens online, because this is what's important to me.
Yeah, I think that, what you said about if you did this, you wouldn't die, that really struck a chord with me thinking, oh, that does make sense, because I think that you can go to like this worst case scenario of, what if people are horrible and all of that. But I mean, I agree, if when you get those messages saying like, your content made me feel less alone or understood, it means the world, really. And it makes you think, okay, I'm going to keep doing this because that one little thing I did helped someone else. So, no, I love that. And I think it's so honest, but really important to mention that, there are things that if you're not ready to talk about, you're not obliged to, and you're not being a
No,
bad person for not doing it.
no, I think I literally saying to somebody the other day, there is so much to be said for just being a disabled person existing online, posting pictures of your cats or your crocheting or your interior design or whatever it is. Like, not, sometimes I feel like it's expected that every disabled, like I sort of joke and say, well, I'm a professional disabled person, that's what I do for a living.
Yeah.
And it's like this expectation that everybody's got to be out here advocating. But I think actually it's really powerful just to see a disabled person existing and being like, oh, what, disabled people? They're just like regular people. Like, yeah, we are. So I think there is just so much to be, if anybody's listening to this, who's like, oh, I feel really crap because I'm not talking about disability issues. You don't have to be, you're alive, enjoy your life.
Yeah.
Pretty much the half the world, doesn't really care if we live or die. So just, it's quite revolutionary, I think, just being a disabled person existing, and showing their joy and pain and everything else, or their cats or their crocheting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with that. And that's a big motivation behind this podcast is, I'm interviewing some amazing disabled advocates, but I also want to be interviewing the person whose job has absolutely nothing to do with disability,
Mm,
because that will show young disabled people that they don't have to be the professional disabled person. I've used that expression myself as well. I ended up working in disability and in the charity sector really by accident. And, I love it and I'm really happy to be doing it. But I don't want disabled people to think that they have to do something in
mm,
that line because, for me, and I think it sounds like for you as well, for so much for our young lives, we didn't identify as disabled. So where are you going to get the representation from disabled people who happen to be, a hedge fund manager or,
mm.
a doctor or, whatever it is that you want to do? Um, so it's, I completely agree. You don't have to do it. There's nothing wrong with not doing it.
No, like I love sort of, as much as I love making content around it all, I also just like making, silly reels with me showing off some skirt I've just got, or, dancing around or talking about stuff I collect and, or interior design and all the other things that make me me, because, I just think it's important that we all, don't just get pigeonholed into professional
Yeah,
disabled people.
absolutely. So, more difficult question. What has been the hardest barrier that you've had to overcome?
Oh, gosh. I think I think my own internalized ableism, I think my own fear of what other people are going to think, say, the way they're going to look at me, just other people. I think sort of overcoming that, and that's still a work in progress as well, because I have some days when I'm out in my chair, like I'm the queen of the fucking world. And other days when I'm out in my chair and, heads down a little bit and just a bit like, oh, fucking hell, don't look at me, don't look at me. So it's not, I
Yeah,
don't think it's a journey. I don't think it's a destination that I'll ever fully reach. But it's definitely something that I'm getting better at, is just knowing that I deserve to take up space, knowing that I deserve to be in all the same places that everybody else can. And I think translating my kind of gobbiness that I have online into real life, because I can be like, yeah, don't take that shit off no one. And then somebody approaches me in the street and I'm
yeah,
like, oh, yes, hello, okay, yeah, that's fine. So trying to be a little bit braver in real life, but also not giving myself a hard time when I'm not, because actually it's really vulnerable being a disabled person out in public. So, I think a lot of people have said to me, oh, somebody come and ask me this question and I just didn't answer right. And I told them, and I'm like, that's not on you. Don't carry that. Don't beat yourself
yeah,
up because you didn't say the right thing at that time, because it's fucking hard. And,
yeah.
it's them and they're able as shit. It's not you. So I think just confidence, I think, has been my sort of biggest sort of challenge. Just that's it.
I think that that's so important. And I've definitely had moments like that where, I tweeted about this, but I, a couple of months ago, had an eye exam, and the man conducting the exam kept asking my dad the questions instead of
Oh,
me. And, like, you know, my dad happened to be there as my carer because, I need 24-hour care, brought dad along. And I just, I felt really crappy afterwards because I didn't say something like, I'm sorry, can you ask me the questions? Or, you are aware that you're doing my eye exam, or whatever sassy, like, response I thought about afterwards. And I don't want to say that I took it because I did, complain afterwards, via email, but it was it really caught me off guard and it made me feel really uncomfortable and vulnerable, like you said. And, I tweeted about this and said that, even me being, fairly loudmouth has moments where I don't feel comfortable challenging things all the time in public. And it's okay if that applies to you. And I sat there looking at the tweet. I was getting like really good engagement, but thinking, I still don't believe that about myself. I believe that and I want other people to know that, but I still felt like I was letting the side down because I didn't go off on one or say something to redirect that scenario. So I think, when you said that the biggest barrier was yourself, I, was a bit taken aback, but I thought I really get that.
I think it's so easy for all of us to internalize all this stuff, isn't it? And think that we're the problem all the time. And I think, yeah, being able to kind of overcome that real, I always, the part of me that kind of carries the most ableism, the part of me that's the most sort of criticizing part, to be able to, overcomes the wrong word, but to be able to kind of make peace with that part and, to not let it rule, when that part's going, well, don't do this, or you can't do this, or they're thinking that, or they're just to sort of, yeah, to kind of just, it's okay, you can take a break from all that worrying. And, I think, yeah, and I think we had was it last year or the year before? We had a door fitter came into the house to talk about a new front door. And I can't even remember what he said now, but it was something along the lines of nothing. I mean, it wasn't horrendous. It was like, oh, so how long have you been in that for? You're quite young. It was something, one of those. Oh, you're a bit young to be in that, aren't you? You're in that all the time. And I should have just said, yeah, you're here for the door. But I didn't. I just sort of, I mumbled something, but he just spoke over me. And I think it's even worse when it's in your own house as well. But it's a power dynamic, isn't it? When you're sort of there as a disabled person and then there's a non-disabled stranger there, especially if they're in a position where they're giving you an examination or something else, it's I have full respect for the people who are able to speak up in those situations, because for me it doesn't always happen.
And I think that that's so important to acknowledge. So you've touched on this a little bit, but I want to ask you, what advice would you give your younger self or others like you?
I think for me, I would have just said to seek out community, because it will change everything for you. Stop being scared and trying to separate yourself from something that actually is going to, it's not this negative thing that you think it is. You're just being told it is, and that's not your truth. That's other people's truth. So, you don't like to stop seeing your disability as a flaw, because it's not. It's just a part of who you are. And seek out other people and go and talk to other people, because there's so much beauty in community and disability, and you just don't sort of realize that.
I definitely agree with that. I think, it provides such catharsis when you are talking to someone about a problem that you have that's really unique to disability and they really get it because they've experienced it. There's something so powerful in that, because you aren't having to explain the nuances of disability or internalized ableism and all of that. It's so important, and definitely something that I shut myself off from for a very long time. So I completely agree with you that, community is wonderful when you're ready to be in it. And I could not recommend following you on Instagram more if any of what we've talked about resonates with you, because it really struck a chord with me and I love seeing your content. And I've been sitting here like listening to you talk about your experiences and the way that you've tried to overcome your own hang-ups. And I just keep thinking, God, I want to be like her. So thank you so much for being so open and honest with me and with this podcast about disability. It's been hugely enlightening. And yeah, just I've been so excited to talk to you. So thank
Oh,
you.
thank you so much for inviting me on. It's always such an honor. I'm always a bit like they want me to come and talk. Okay. Just thank you. It's been such a nice chat. I've really enjoyed it.
Amazing. Great. Well, everyone go follow Nina on Instagram and are there any other, are you one of those brave people who's on TikTok?
Oh, I'm on fucking everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't really, I tend to just share my stuff across all the same stuff across just in case like Instagram explodes, I feel like. But yeah, I'm kind of like Nina Tame, Tame, just across the board. I'm generally lurking on some sort of social media platform or another.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again.
No, thank you. It's been great.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Wheelchair Activist, where I interviewed the amazing Nina Tame. I learned so much from her, and I really hope that you did too. Before you go, I just wanted to remind you that we do have a GoFundMe and a Patreon set up for this podcast. We are committed to making this platform as inclusive and as accessible as possible, but to do that costs money. We're working with an amazing podcast producer to make sure that this podcast is completely accessible, and we're running regular accessibility audits of the website. If you're able to contribute anything, we would appreciate it so much. But if you aren't, give it a share, and maybe that rich uncle or maybe a rich cousin will be interested in supporting this cause. Thank you so much again for listening, and I will see you very soon.